Thank you, Senator Bates. Colleagues, today I'm here to present Senate Bill 50, the More Homes Act. SB 50 addresses one of the fundamental obstacles to having enough housing in California for everyone who needs it, specifically hyper low-density zoning that bans even small apartment buildings and affordable housing buildings in a huge majority of the state of California. Hyper-low density zoning, often in the form of banning and prohibiting all forms of housing other than single-family homes, makes it impossible for California to close our massive 3.5 million home deficit. It perpetuates segregation. It pushes working families out of communities and into multi-hour commutes. It increases freeway congestion and carbon emissions, and it makes housing brutally expensive. SB 50 sets basic standards for zoning near high-quality public transportation and in job centers. It does so by legalizing small to mid-sized multi-unit housing in areas that are within walking distance of high-quality public transit and in job-rich areas. And it does so while ensuring that cities continue to have local control over many important issues. For example, the approval process for individual projects. Cities will retain that full control, whether CEQA, conditional use, discretionary appeal, design standards, rules around demolitions or restrictions on demolitions, all local control under this bill. Cities will continue to be able to create and impose impact fees, whether for transportation or sewers or affordable housing. And cities will continue to be able to impose setback requirements. Many, many aspects of local land use under SB 50 will continue to be under local control. As you can see from the committee analysis, colleagues, the coalition supporting this bill is broad and diverse. It's one of the few bills that I've seen with endorsements from both the California Labor Federation and the California Chamber of Commerce. You don't see that very often. Our endorsers also include the building trades, nonprofit affordable housing builders who build subsidized housing for our low-income residents, the California Building Industry Association, major environmental organizations, the UC Students Association, AARP, Habitat for Humanity, disability rights organizations, and a growing list of mayors, county supervisors, and city council members who understand that the current system isn't working and needs reform. And the bill's 16 co-authors from all over the state include some of the legislature's most liberal, progressive Democrats and some of its most conservative Republicans, showing once again that housing is not a partisan issue. Whether red or blue, our communities are struggling with housing. There's been a lot of misinformation about this bill, about how it's a supposed complete state takeover of local land use. That is absolutely false. As I just described, SB 50 retains enormous local decision-making. But in one area of statewide importance, density near public transportation and jobs, it sets a basic standard. Others have claimed that SB 50 is an attack on single-family homes. That is also inaccurate. Nothing in Senate Bill 50 prevents anyone from building or living in a single-family home. Single-family homes, in my view, are a good thing, but so are apartment buildings. SB 50 allows single-family homes, but it moves us away from mandating that single-family homes are the only thing that are allowed to be built. If you're near transit or jobs, you should be able to build various kinds of housing, not just one type. So why focus on zoning density near transit and jobs? While zoning isn't the only impediment to California meeting its housing needs, we also need financial investment in affordable housing. We need stronger tenant protections. We need financial support to help cities engage in good planning, and so forth. Zoning is foundational. You can have all of the investment and streamlining in the world, but if it's illegal, if it is prohibited to build enough housing, then you're sort of stuck. In 80% approximately of the residentially zoned land in California, and about 70% even in big cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, it is illegal to build anything other than a single-family home or maybe a 2-unit building. That means it's illegal to build even a 3, 4, 5, or 6-unit small apartment building. Illegal in the vast majority of California. That means it's illegal to build multi-unit senior housing. Illegal to build affordable housing for low-income residents, because that is inherently multi-unit. And what does this restrictive zoning mean for California? It makes it all but impossible to close our 3.5 million home deficit. It's basic math. If you say that you can only build 1 unit per parcel in the vast majority of California, you are not going to meet your housing goals. And if you do, you're going to do it by creating more and more sprawl, covering up farmland and open space, and clogging our freeways and increasing carbon emissions, and creating a growing class of supercommuters who spend 4 or 5 hours a day on the road. This housing shortage, which is self-inflicted in many ways, has real-life consequences for people. It pushes people into poverty and homelessness. It spikes evictions and displacement. It is a problem, and we have to address it. And we will never meet our climate goals if we continue to have hyper-low density zoning near jobs and transit. All we will do is force people to commute long hours and increase carbon emissions. SB 50 addresses this problem in a thoughtful and balanced way. Over the past year and a half, we have worked with a broad spectrum of stakeholders, including affordable housing and tenant advocates, for-profit and not-for-profit housing developers, environmental organizations, labor unions, students, religious leaders, and disability and senior advocates to craft a bill to move the dial on housing so that we move away from housing anxiety and toward housing action. SB 50 provides that in areas within a half a mile of fixed rail or ferry stops, within a quarter mile of a high-frequency bus stop, which must run from early morning into the night, 7 days a week at a high frequency, or in a job-rich area, a city cannot put an arbitrary cap on density by mandating, for example, only 1 or 2 units are allowed on the parcel. A city also cannot force a height limit lower than 4 or 5 stories in the areas around fixed rail or ferry. Of course, basic geometry and the building code put a natural limit on density. There's only so much space, and there are basic requirements under the building code, but we will move away from the arbitrary numerical caps. Please note that I originally last year had an 8-story option in the bill, and we removed that, listening to constructive feedback. Some were unhappy that we removed it, but some were very happy. Around bus stops and job-rich areas, the bill does not change the ability of cities to enforce local height limits or setbacks. So if the local height limit is 30 feet, that height limit will be adopted effectively by SB 50, but instead of being mandated to only build single family, you could build, let's say, a 3-flat multi-unit, or 6, 2 per story. The building would look the same from the outside, the same height, same setback, but inside it would house more families. Also, in response to feedback from tenant advocates, this bill now contains among the strongest, perhaps the strongest tenant protections that exist under state law. Specifically, if a tenant has resided on the property at any point in time in the last 7 years, you cannot get a demolition permit to build under this bill. Even if your local city would allow you to have that permit, this bill says you can't use this bill to start demolishing tenant-occupied buildings. The bill further provides that if an Ellis Act eviction has occurred on the property in the last 15 years, you can't invoke this bill. Our goal here is to be additive with housing, to add the housing we need, not to replace existing residents. I am very sensitive to the concerns expressed around displacement. We have experienced that in San Francisco. It is happening around the state, and we have to be very careful that we are adding the housing we need, which will reduce displacement by stopping this runaway housing market, while making sure that people who are already living in a community can stay there. SB 50 requires that affordable housing be a part of new developments above a certain size. Local inclusionary will apply. If there is no local inclusionary, then this provides an inclusionary structure for these projects. Finally, SB 50 defers implementation of the bill for 5 years in what we call in the bill, quote unquote, sensitive communities, defined as neighborhoods with significant low-income populations with risk of displacement, so that these communities can engage in local anti-displacement planning and exercise more flexibility about the implementation in their neighborhoods. Now, in talking about this bill, we've had a lot of discussion about local control. While the bill, as I described, largely retains local control, it does make adjustments to the state and local decision-making balance. Just as we have a state-local balance around public education, local control isn't biblical. Local control is a good thing when it delivers good results. And it usually does deliver good results, and I say this as a former local elected official. But not always. And when it comes to housing, California's system of almost pure local control hasn't worked. We're not trying to do away with that system. We're trying to reform it so that we can move forward as a state. I also want to be clear that this bill is a continuing work in progress. We have made a lot of progress over the past year or so, working not just with our supporters, but with our constructive critics, people who opposed the bill last year or were neutral, but were willing to engage with us to provide feedback and work together towards solutions. As you probably saw, a coalition of housing and progressive advocacy organizations sent in a letter of concern outlining issues on which they want to continue to work. I am deeply committed to that work. While I can never guarantee that we will all end up agreeing on 100% of everything, as I've shown over the past year, I'm willing to listen, accept criticism and feedback, and adjust the bill in reasonable ways. Indeed, the tenant and demolition protections in this bill were negotiated with some of the key signers of that letter of concern. So I put my money where my mouth is when it comes to working with people who aren't in agreement. I also want to thank Senator McGuire, who's a member of this committee, who's not here right now. He'll be here shortly. I want to thank Senator McGuire, who also, of course, chairs the next committee stop for this bill, the Senate Governance and Finance Committee. Senator McGuire and I chair the two committees that hear a lot of the housing bills as double referrals. We agree on many things. We don't agree on everything. We have some differing perspectives. But I think our pro tem, and she is a very wise person, in her wisdom, she appointed two chairs who don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything, because that often results in strong, balanced policy. Senator McGuire and I have been working intensively for a while now to work toward a shared approach where we can move forward together regarding SB 50 and SB 4. I know that Senator McGuire and I are both committed to doing everything we can to reach a resolution. Colleagues, when it comes to housing, our constituents are suffering, and they want their elected representatives to fix the problem. And frankly, most of them don't really care whether the elected officials fixing the problem are the people they voted for on the city council line or the people they voted for on the state senate or assembly line. They just want us to fix it, and they don't care which of us is actually fixing it. They want us to do what we can to make things better. regardless of what our title is. SB 50 is certainly not the complete solution, but it is part of that solution. Colleagues, I thank you, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote. With me today to testify are Pedro Galvayo with the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California, one of our bill sponsors, which represents a broad coalition of affordable housing organizations. Michael Gunning with the California Building Industry Association, and Cesar Diaz with the State Building Trades. Thank you. And I want to also say that joining us today, available to answer questions, is Brian Hanlon, the CEO of California YIMBY, also one of our sponsors.